Well, hello everyone. I just want you guys to know that I started off the new year right by getting my second strike on YouTube. Um, I had posted a video about depopulation, about how it is something intentional that is being perpetrated in many ways by the establishment. Understand that the people in charge of this Earth realm right now feel that the population needs to be about 500 million or less. That means they need to get rid of 15 out of every 16 people. And there's many ways that they are going to do that. For example, the leading cause of death. There was an article about this. I believe it was on this site recently. The leading cause of death for the last several years has actually been abortion. Yeah, here we go. Abortion was leading cause of death worldwide for fifth consecutive year in 2023. Um, yeah, humanity is culling itself. Um, So we talked about in that video, so there were some things I talked about in there that I'm not going to rehash because that is the reason that that video was struck and I got my, deleted and I got my second strike on YouTube because I talked about some of the medical stuff that the establishment's doing. Uh, Pay attention, do your research, and question everything. That's what I'm going to say regarding that stuff. So I'm not gonna rehash that stuff because I don't want this video to get, another strike. Although it may for different reasons because we're going to delve into some politics here, and what's going on in the world. But so abortion, yes, there's a reason why the establishment is pushing abortion. There's the reason why abortion is the number one and most important issue for the Democrat cult in the United States, because um, those who rule this earth realm, they hold to something called the Malthusian fallacy, which is the idea that resources increase at a linear rate, production of food resources, for example, whereas population increases at an exponential rate. And so, according to Malthus, who was this economist that lived, I think, in the 1800s, eventually you're going to hit a point where the world can't sustain people. They can't produce enough food. That's not humanity's problem right now. So I mentioned in that other video that was removed that this Earth realm can sustain 60 to 80 billion people. There have been studies that have concluded that. Of course, the establishment's never going to push those studies or really make that information known. God is not a fool. He created this earth realm to sustain us, and he commanded humanity to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. We have not even come close to accomplishing that yet. I mentioned in that video on depopulation that was deleted that in grains alone, enough food is produced every year to feed twice the world population, but millions will starve to death this year because of poor management of our food resources. And that's not even counting, that's just grains, enough to feed the world population twice over. That's not even counting, other sources of food, fruits, vegetables, meats, poultry, dairy, um, even alternative sources of nutrition like fungi and algae. Um, we don't have a resource problem, we have a management problem in this earth realm. Anyway, that video was removed, and the reason it was removed is YouTube is owned by an entity. It's part of Alphabet, um, which is a globalist propaganda outlet, is what it is. If you're not aware of this, all the search engines, so the internet and the amount of information there is not, that's not really, it's not so much that web pages are being taken down and destroyed, although that does happen. Um, the establishment does do that to some degree, but what they're doing is they're gatekeeping the internet by controlling the search engines. And so if you do a search on Google, for example, you will find that really once you get past the first maybe 5 to 9 pages, you start seeing all the same results over and over again, just in a different order. And this is what all the major search engines are doing now. Is there's billions of web pages out there. They just won't ever show you many of those web pages. If it doesn't fit their narrative, it will be filtered out, and you won't see that in a Google search. You won't see that in a Yahoo search. You won't see that in a Bing search. And it used to be there were these independent search engines that had their own algorithms that you could go to actually get unfettered access and a more unbiased search that would pull more results from the internet. For example, DuckDuckGo or StartPage. But what's happening is the big search engines, the mega corporations, are buying them up, and they're changing their algorithms to be exactly the same as the establishment controlled ones. So there's plenty of information out there on the internet. You just will never find it because the search engines won't let you find it. And so if you have, watched a video in the past and said, yeah, that was really good, that was a really popular video, that was trending, I remember that was a big deal, but I can't find it on the internet anymore, it's probably not that it's not there anymore. It's probably out there. It's probably that the search engines just aren't allowing you to see that. And we see this with YouTube, where they always have those disclaimers under certain topics related to elections, certain topics related to health concerns. I'm not going to get more specific than that. Certain topics related to flat Earth, and certain topics related to the Illuminati and secret societies. For some reason, the establishment doesn't want certain types of information getting out there about these particular topics. And that's why I got my community strike, because I was saying some things in my video about the World Health Organization, which is an evil globalist entity. They recently released guidance that suggested that toddlers should be, how do I put this in a way that is, let me just put it this way, toddlers should be encouraged to explore their sexuality. That's all I'm going to say about that. But that was official guidance released by the World Health Organization. Understand that these satanic, megalomaniacal, psychopathic, Luciferian scumbags are the ones who rule the world right now. And they are trying to get the people in line with what they believe by simply restricting the information that's available to we the people through, these control mechanisms being placed on the internet and things like that. And it's working very effectively. So many people, because they're only seeing one side of any issue or any story, they just believe whatever the establishment tells them. And they believe what the government says, they believe what the media says. The media is government controlled for the most part, with the exception of a few, little oases of information, so to speak. For example, I like this one, the Gateway Pundit. There's another outlet called, although I don't agree with some of their narratives, Blacklisted News is okay, and then, but you got to be very selective with them because there's some extreme hardcore conspiracy theorists on that site. And then there's Redacted News, which I really like. There's some other outlets out there as well. The Epoch Times is a pretty good newspaper and website. The Western Journal is really good stuff, generally from a Christian worldview. So I like their stuff as well. But you got to get away from mainstream media, or you're just going to be fed the lies of, the Communist News Network and their associates, which is government-controlled propaganda. But that's a little bit of a rabbit trail. I really want to talk about something that happened, a few years ago around this time of year, January 6th, the so-called insurrection. And it was an insurrection. We're going to talk about exactly what I mean by that. But understand that the establishment is following rules set out in various playbooks, like, for example, Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And one of the rules that they use, or methods that they use, is called projection, where you accuse your opponents of doing what you're doing. And so when you accuse someone of something, whether it's a true accusation or not, and we see this with, Trump and other things, you shift the momentum of the argument. You shift the focus. You put the spotlight on somebody else and their actions while taking it off of yourself. So if you are projecting, in other words, you're doing something corrupt, evil, and illegal, but you accuse someone else of doing that, suddenly the spotlight's on them, and it takes that scrutiny off of you, even though you're doing those same things yourself. or maybe the person that you've accused is completely innocent, but the focus is now on them and it's not on you. And because you have called them out for that, it makes it seem less likely that you're doing those same things. This is called projection, and it's a strategy that the establishment uses all the time. And that's what happened on January 6th. January 6th was absolutely an insurrection, but probably not in the sense that the establishment or government or the Biden regime wants you to think that it was. And here's what I mean by that. So understand that there was historical precedent. There was a time when some of the Electoral College votes were under dispute, and Jefferson, I believe he was Speaker of the House at the time, he simply claimed those Electoral College votes for himself. And he was allowed to do that by even by his political opponents. Why? Because he was people knew that he had the best interests of the country. For the sake of unity and moving forward, he was a competent leader. He was a great thinker. He was one of the influential, founders of our nation. So they allowed that to happen because they were participating with a certain spirit in American government at the time. They didn't have a desire to split or divide the country. They didn't have an agenda to radically reshape the structure of things. They just wanted to get on with the business of governance so that people could get on with their lives in peace, prosperity, and liberty. And so Jefferson, there's an issue with some electoral college votes. Jefferson just claimed them for himself as the Speaker of the House because he was running for president, and he, I believe, in that election, took the presidency and became president afterwards, if I recall correctly. Feel free to check into these things for yourself. But understand that when no, I think I have that mixed up. I believe he was vice president at the time. Because the situation that I'm thinking of was a parallel to the Pence situation. Understand that Pence, as vice president, presiding over that electoral college process in Congress, that was an intentional check and balance that was put into place there. He was not simply rubber stamping that. He was not simply presiding, but with no ability to have input into the process. He is there as a check valve, the vice president, or he was, I should say, to make sure that that process was being done in an above-board manner. And so he did have a responsibility to, if there were issues with the process, with the Electoral College vote, he had an issue. He had a duty really to question that and to make sure that the process was done with integrity. And so understand that, I guess it would have been 2021, January 6th. What was going on there was the Electoral College votes were being counted. Pence was presiding. And there were several states that had presented dueling slates of electors. In other words, there was still some contention within the state level processes, and that had not fully settled yet, and that there were actually dual slates of electors. Electors who were going to cast their votes for Biden and electors who were going to cast their votes for Trump. And so what Pence should have done, what it was his duty to do on January 6th, was to kick those processes back to the state and say, hey, fix your electoral process, and once things are settled, give us your definitive result, and then we'll go from there. So there is a huge amount of hypocrisy here, and here's what I mean by that. Back in the day, it's my understanding that during the Reagan era, for example, that they were still counting ballots by hand back then, and they had the results within a day. They knew who won the elections. And now here we are in the 2020s. We are counting ballots with computers, which should be faster and more accurate, right? And sometimes it takes a week to process the results before we know who the next president's going to be. How can that be? And so on the one hand, they're fully willing, after election night to drag things on indefinitely until really the establishment gets the result that they want by whatever means they need to do that. and I've talked about this before, adjudication and other little things that happen behind the scenes fixed the elections. They were stolen, absolutely. Um, I might get my third strike here and then just be done on YouTube. And if that happens, so be it. It will be what it will be. I'll move elsewhere. But you can look into that. Adjudication is a starting point for you. Um, Fractional voting or these weighted ballot races is another thing that you should look into. So one vote should be one vote. There should be no fractional voting. You should never have zero point 0.3 votes. Um, but what's happening is these voting systems, voting computers, they are actually set up to process fractional voting. And they will say that the reason for that is because these systems can be used with large corporations in like shareholder votes and stuff. So you might actually have people that have fractions of a vote or like, uh, you know, 10.3 votes or whatever based on the number of shares that they have. Uh, I don't think it's appropriate to have voting systems being used for presidential elections of, federal elections of the most powerful nation in the world. I don't think it's appropriate to have these multi-purpose systems that have a great deal of leeway in how they're programmed, um, being used for these federal elections and also being used for these, corporate processes or, shareholder votes and things like that. You need a higher standard of security when you're talking about a federal election in one of the in the United States, the most powerful nation in the world. You should not have voting systems that allow for things like that, fractional voting and stuff. That's a real issue. And we do see, if you start digging into the results of some of these elections, we do see that fractional voting was being applied. What do we mean by that? Well, behind the scenes, they're able to do things like apply multipliers. So that's been demonstrated to have happened in various political races using these voting machines and stuff like that, where one candidate, their vote count is being multiplied by, say, zero point 0.8, and the other candidate, their votes are being multiplied by 1.2 behind the scenes to slant the elections and get certain results for certain candidates. There's been a lot of election fixing in the last couple decades, probably even going back before that, but in the last couple decades, we're talking about voting machines being used to fix elections. Anyway, I'm not going to delve too much into all the mechanics of how that happened. You can do your research there. Um, Weighted ballot races and adjudication being the two keywords that you need to really understand, yes, the elections were stolen through various means. Um, Another method was called the drop and roll, and if you search that term, drop and roll, here on the Gateway Pundit, you will have numerous articles that show you another way that the elections were stolen. But let's get back to January 6th. So Vice President Pence, he was presiding over the Electoral College counts, and he is a check and balance on that process. There was precedent for him to kick any questionable state results back to the states and tell them to refine their process. So understand that election day, now that's more like election week or election month, as the results are, tallied and all that by machines, which somehow can't do it more quickly and accurately than people by hand used to be able to do it back in the day. That's a real problem. And we're told that it's completely okay for that, counting process to take as long as it takes. But for some reason, no, the Electoral College vote had to be finalized January 6th. It's got to be done today. It's got to be done by the end of the day. We can't delay that process, even if we suspect that there were some questionable things going on with the elections. That's a double standard. That's hypocrisy. Um, so what Pence should have done is kicked several states' Electoral College. He should have just told the states, you need to double check your results, make sure things are settled and finalized, and then get back to us, and then we'll finish the Electoral College counts. Now understand that he had that right and ability to do that, And I say that because afterwards, laws were passed that took away the vice president's ability to do that. So the the framework, the legal framework, procedural framework of our system was patched, so to speak, to make sure that vice presidents did not have that ability in the future to question fraudulent election results. And so we know, based on that, that Pence, yes, he did have the duty, the ability, and the right to question any states with dubious electoral college results and kick those back to the states and tell them to fix it before moving forward. Now, under the that particular session of Congress, normal rules were in effect. Normal rules were in effect. So the various different results and so forth, there was going to be a period of debate, scrutiny, questioning things, and there were members of Congress who had different things that they were going to bring up, different concerns about how the election had been run in 2020. Uh, that was going to be a real problem for the those who were fixing the elections. And so really what they needed to do was they needed something that was going to interrupt that normal session of Congress so that they could create an emergency session of Congress with special rules or a special session. I don't remember exactly the terminology that they used, but they needed a special session of Congress that would allow the Electoral College vote to be ramrodded through very quickly without the extra scrutiny and deliberation under a different rule set. So what they needed was a public disturbance of some kind, a security issue of some kind that would interrupt that session of Congress. Enter the January 6th insurrection, so-called, and I'm using air quotes here. In my room, you can't see me, but I am. Now understand, though, that a disturbance was going to happen that day, period, no matter what. And I will remind you of something, that early January 6th, some pipe bombs were placed in D.C., and they were placed at I believe it was actually at a Republican National Convention building and at a Democrat National Convention building in D.C. But basically, pipe bombs were placed at uh, important sites for both political parties. And to this day, the FBI has been unable to find who placed those pipe bombs or to turn up any concrete leads on that. Why? Well, here's what was going to happen that day. The establishment was going to try to stir up some big riot of patriotic pro-Trump protesters in D.C. that day for the optics of it, because the optics would be absolutely great. They would be able to use that to destroy the Make America Great Again movement and hopefully to hang Donald Trump by and to destroy him. However, if they were unable to incite and stir something like that up, all they had to do was blow those two pipe bombs, and they would have the disturbance that they needed to suspend that session of Congress where they were counting the electoral votes, and to later reconvene with their special session with special rules and ramrod through the stolen election. So regardless of what happened on January 6th, the establishment already had everything in place that they needed to finalize the electoral college votes and ramrod through the stolen election, period, no matter what. So really, the so-called insurrection of January 6th was irrelevant, even if it hadn't happened, even if there wasn't a protest in D.C. that day. It wouldn't have mattered. The establishment would have made sure that those pipe bombs were either detonated or discovered, and so that they would have had an excuse to, evacuate the Capitol and postpone the regular session with its regular rule set, so that the election steal could be solidified in a special session. So that's really what happened that day. Understand, though, that the instigators that day were the police officers, Capitol Police. We now know that there were over 200 federal officers. Well, 200 police, let me just say that, whether we're talking undercover Capitol Police, CPs, or whether we're talking FBI. There were hundreds of police embedded in the crowd, instigating. We know that Antifa and BLM had protests in D.C. planned that day as well, and instead of doing separate things, they just infiltrated the crowd of Trump supporters and instigated things. And unfortunately, a lot of patriotic, America-loving Trump supporters in the crowd that day went along with things. You had a lot of very suspicious things where you had this tower where there's someone with a megaphone saying, "Move forward, Patriots! Move forward, Patriots!" Well, who was that person? Who were they to be directing things and fomenting things? But I think a lot of people fell into this trap. They just assumed, oh, look, it's another um, patriotic protester protesting the stolen electoral process in this country, and people were fired up because there was a sentiment there. People understood that our government, our system of governance, is being taken away from us, and America died that day. You got to understand, if America is not of, by, and for the people, it's not the same America I grew up in. Unless 2020 gets fixed, unless the rightful president is restored. Now, a lot of people think that Trump is compromised, that he's an establishment guy, that he's a Freemason, and he's a student of Kabbalah. All this stuff. I'm not sure that Trump is really the greatest guy myself. I voted for him twice. I'll vote for him again. Um, because regardless of, because he's the only candidate, basically. He is the rightful president. He did win the 2020 elections, period. And that's apparent to any person who is thinking about things and who's actually dug into things in detail. But whether he is actually capable of leading this nation to a better place or not, I'm very, very skeptical of that. He has shown himself to be too trusting of establishment individuals and establishment narratives in the past. I don't think that he can really drain the swamp like he has said he would like to do. But all that aside, Donald John Trump is the rightful president of the U.S., and this country's dead. It's over. It's done with unless he gets back into the presidency, and unless the election steal of 2020 is fixed, is and things are placed, means are put into place, defenses to prevent that from happening again. And I just don't see that happening, though, because the corruption in our country has seeped in so deeply. And where's that corruption coming from? Well, understand that the Soviets, communists, they promised that they were going to infiltrate the United States at every level of government and society, and that they were going to destroy us from the inside out. And they've done that. Understand that unions, if you look into the people that were creating these labor unions and such back 150 years ago, what kind of ties do they have? They have communist ties and they have Freemasonic ties. Yes, and you often run into, I've heard it said of people, oh, he's a good Christian, he's a great family man, he's a good father, but he's a union man, so of course he always votes Democrat. Because that's just what the unions do. They vote Democrat. Well, yeah, exactly. The unions are powerful control systems that are used to manipulate people and to change outcomes in labor and even things like that, influencing people's votes. A lot of people don't realize that the Democratic Party is, it's basically communism. And unfortunately, then in the Republican Party, you have so many people who are complicit as well and who are just going along with that. Communism is an ugly, evil thing that has murdered hundreds of millions of people in the last, 150 years. We don't want that here, but that's what we're up against. We're in the middle of a communist takeover in this country. No nation, to my knowledge, has ever successfully resisted a communist or Bolshevik takeover in the past. None. And I don't know if the United States will be able to either. I think enough people are aware of what's going on here that we will have a civil war if things keep going and if they keep pushing us. But can America survive that? I really don't think so, if I'm honest. I really don't think so. And people don't realize just the level of what we're up against. Our education system, think about it. Who controls that? Well, we know that, Freemasons, they take credit for instituting our public education system. You have Rothschild and Rockefeller, who conspired, and they wrote correspondence between each other about setting up the public education systems in Europe and in the U.S. And then our higher education universities and colleges are just full of these activist, communist, Marxist professors who are brainwashing our youth. So yeah, the Marxists, the communists, they captured our education system. They captured unions. Uh, what else have they captured? Media. Not only what we use for entertainment, like Hollywood and things like that, but um, news media, which is now just a mouthpiece for government. And yes, they've wormed their way into government and the intelligence agencies as well. The rot has set in. It is so deeply ingrained now that I'm not sure there's enough of the system left untainted that we can come back from this. Now, a lot of lies have been propagated about January 6th. I just want to talk about some of these. One lie is that Brian Sicknick was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. He was a Capitol Police officer. He did not die on January 6th. He actually died on January 7th, and it was due to health issues probably related to the tear gas and other munitions that the Capitol Police were discharging into the crowds. Um, by the way, the Capitol Police, they were timing their munitions so that they'd go off at head level, face level of these protesters. They were trying to stir things up, trying to do as much damage and injury to people as possible. But let me reiterate this. 0 law enforcement died on January 6th. 0. Brian Sicknick died on January 7th. And then there was a spate of suicides, and I'm doing air quotes again on that, by the way. There's a spate of suicides amongst the Capitol Police in the months following January 6th. Because we know that law enforcement, they were letting people walk into the Capitol and things like that. They were just opening the doors, letting people walk in. They were not telling people to leave. Now, sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. It's pretty clear that within at least some of the Capitol Police were, being they were part of this where they were trying to entrap the protesters and get these really great optics that then they could sell this narrative of insurrection to the public at large and use this as a weapon against Donald Trump. And so 0 law enforcement officers were killed on January 6th, but four protesters died on January 6th. They were Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by Byrd. Now, this fellow has a history of negligence with firearms and safety. For example, on one occasion, he left his sidearm in a Capitol bathroom, is my understanding. Just left it there. There was another young woman. I believe her name was Boyland. I forget her full name off the top of my head, but she was beaten to death by a female Capitol Police officer. And then there were 2 men who were a little older, and they died of health issues that were probably exacerbated by the gas and the flashbangs that the police were using on the crowd that day. So 4 protesters died that day. Many of those protesters, we think of Ashley Babbitt. A lot of people know about her because she was shot to death. But they don't know about the other 3. Another young woman who was beaten to death, and 2 men who died probably due to health-related effects of the gas, tear gas, and flashbangs used on the crowd that day. I'm not going to say that, even amongst the patriots and the Trump supporters, I'm not going to say that everyone was there with pure motives or that everyone who went into the Capitol went in with pure motives. I've definitely seen some clips of people who were in advance, talking on social media about doing stupid stuff and how they did see it as an insurrection. That was not the general sentiment of the majority, though. because if it was, they would have come armed. Whereas the reality is there was only a few people who had firearms that day, and they weren't using them against police. I believe there was one guy that he was arrested on firearms charges because he had ammunition and firearms in his vehicle, but he didn't have them, I don't think, on his person. And he certainly wasn't using them against police or anything like that. No, the violence was pretty, um, the weapon use, I should say, was pretty one-sided. It was police on protesters. Protesters were not. Um, there were a few incidents of protesters using, improvised weapons, I guess, but it was really the Capitol Police who instigated things and who fired on the crowd and things like that. And I'm not going to go into too much more detail on this. I've read many accounts, first-hand accounts on this stuff. I've watched many videos. You can do your own research on this stuff and come to your own conclusions. But the establishment got what they wanted. They got the optics of an insurrection. I'm using air quotes again. Like I said, it wasn't a real insurrection. If it had been, even if a small percentage, 1% of that crowd had come with battle rifles, that would have been a very different day. It would have been a very, very different day. But that wasn't the intention. It was a peaceful protest. And that is the bottom line there. But it was an insurrection, not by the American people. They were just there to protest their government being stolen and their country being stolen and their voice being stolen by the communist scumbags who are taking over this country. It was an insurrection by the establishment, undermining everything that America stands for. Thank you for listening. I hope you guys have a great week. And, if I'm not shut down for posting stuff like this, I guess I'll see you for the next video. Have a good one. Bye.